Hey everyone, I'm working to hit 1,000 subscribers, and I need your help to get there. If you enjoy this content, please hit that subscribe button right now.
The Phillies just wrapped up their arbitration business for 2026, agreeing to contracts with 7 players and avoiding what could have been contentious hearings down the line. On the surface, this looks like standard offseason housekeeping, locking in your arbitration-eligible players, setting your payroll commitments, moving forward with roster certainty. But here's what makes this interesting. Just because these deals got done doesn't mean all these players will actually be wearing Phillies uniforms when the season starts. Let's run through the numbers first because they tell you a lot about how the organization values each piece. Tanner Banks got $1.2 million, which makes sense for a lefty reliever who had a breakout 2025 and is expected to take on expanded responsibilities this year. The Phillies clearly believe in what Banks showed them, and that modest salary reflects both his rising value and his relative inexperience at the major league level. Yoan Duran locked in $7.5 million as the team's closer, and that feels appropriate for someone the Phillies traded real assets to acquire at the deadline. Giving up Mick Abel and Eduardo Tate wasn't a small move, and committing this kind of money to Duran signals they view him as a foundational piece of their bullpen construction moving forward. His first half with Philadelphia was excellent, and expectations are high for what a full season could look like. Jesus Luzardo at $11 million might be one of the better values in baseball right now. Coming off the season he just had, establishing himself as one of the better left-handed starters in the game, locking him in at this number represents significant surplus value for the Phillies. That's the kind of contract that looks better every month if Luzardo maintains anything close to his current performance level. Edmundo Sosa getting $4.4 million reflects what he's become. One of the more valuable utility players in baseball. Brandon Marsh at $5.2 million as the likely opening day left fielder makes sense, given his defensive excellence and what he brings to the lineup. Bryson Stott at $5.9 million continues to be a solid value play for Philadelphia's infield. But then we get to Alec Bohm at $10.2 million. And this is where things get complicated. That's a significant chunk of payroll for a player who might not even be on the roster when the season starts, and that possibility has everything to do with Bichette. The Athletic reported that the Phillies have a meeting scheduled with Bichette in the coming days, and their interest level has intensified as circumstances have shifted this offseason. If Philadelphia actually pulls off acquiring Bichette, the immediate casualty would almost certainly be Bohm. You can't carry both players without creating a positional logjam that doesn't make strategic sense. Bichette would slot in at either second or third base, Stott would play the other position, and Bohm becomes expendable. That $10.2 million arbitration number for Bohm suddenly becomes relevant in a completely different way. It's not about paying him to play in Philadelphia. It's about what kind of trade package you can build around a player making that salary. Teams evaluating Bohm know exactly what his financial commitment looks like, which simplifies trade negotiations and makes matching salaries easier in potential deals. The broader implication here is that the Phillies are positioning themselves with maximum flexibility. They've got their arbitration-eligible players locked in, they know their baseline payroll commitments, and now they can pursue aggressive roster upgrades without worrying about unresolved contract situations creating complications. That's smart organizational management, even if some of these players end up elsewhere. The Bichette pursuit represents exactly the kind of move that could reshape Philadelphia's championship window. He's 27 years old. He'll be 28 on opening day. And someone pointed out he's actually 19 months younger than Bohm. That matters when you're trying to balance win-now urgency with sustainable roster construction. Adding Bichette doesn't just upgrade talent, it infuses youth into a core that's been aging and brings dynamic ability to a lineup that's looked stagnant at times. If this deal happens, and that's still a significant if, the Phillies would immediately become one of the younger, more athletic infields in baseball. Bichette's presence changes offensive dynamics, creates different lineup construction options, and gives the team a proven performer who's shown he can handle pressure situations. The upgrade from Bohm to Bichette, both offensively and in terms of long-term planning, would be substantial. The JT Realmuto situation adds another layer to all of this. Reports suggest there's a standoff between what Realmuto wants in his next contract and what the Phillies are willing to offer. If Philadelphia pivots toward Bichette, that likely means moving on from Realmuto and finding a cheaper catching option on the market. That money saved at catcher helps finance the Bichette acquisition and potentially gives them flexibility to address other roster needs. This is where offseason roster construction gets fascinating. On paper, you've got 9 players whose arbitration situations are resolved. In reality, multiple pieces of that group might be gone before opening day, converted into different assets that the front office believes better position the team for championship contention. The arbitration agreements create clarity, but they don't create permanence. What the Phillies are doing is maintaining optionality while they pursue their bigger picture vision. They're not locked into any specific roster configuration. They've got tradable contracts if they need to make moves. They've got financial clarity for planning purposes. And they've avoided the distraction and potential ugliness of arbitration hearings that can create tension between players and management. Arbitration is always a weird process because it forces teams to essentially argue why a player isn't worth what he's asking for. Even when deals get done and hearings are avoided, the negotiation process can leave residual awkwardness. The fact that Philadelphia resolved all of these situations without drama speaks to competent front office work and player relationships that allowed for reasonable negotiations. The practical impact of avoiding hearings shouldn't be understated. Arbitration hearings force organizations to present negative cases about their own players, highlighting weaknesses and arguing against value. Even when it's understood as part of the business, it creates friction that can affect relationships and locker room dynamics. Getting deals done means everyone moves forward without that baggage. Looking at this group collectively, you see a mix of established contributors, emerging talents, and players whose roles might shift dramatically depending on what moves come next. Banks and Duran anchor a bullpen that's been retooled for championship contention. Luzardo gives them frontline starting pitching at a manageable cost. Sosa and Marsh provide defensive excellence and roster flexibility. Stott represents middle infield stability and offensive upside. And Bohm sits in the middle of it all, locked in at over $10 million, but potentially ticketed for a different uniform if the Phillies land their primary target. That's not a knock on Bohm. It's a recognition that roster construction sometimes requires moving good players to acquire better fits. If trading Bohm is the cost of getting Bichette, most Philadelphia fans would make that swap without hesitation. The coming days and weeks will clarify which of these arbitration agreements represent actual roster commitments versus temporary placeholders before bigger moves materialize. The meeting with Bichette could change everything, or it could end with Philadelphia deciding the fit or cost doesn't work and running with the group they've already assembled. Either way, the Phillies have positioned themselves to act decisively when opportunities arise. What we're watching is an organization that understands you don't win championships by standing still. You identify upgrade paths, you maintain financial flexibility, you make difficult roster decisions when they improve your championship odds. The arbitration agreements provide the foundation, but the real story is what comes next, and whether the Phillies have the conviction to pull the trigger on transformative moves. Drop your thoughts on whether Bohm gets moved and if Bichette ends up in Philadelphia.